You have probably seen many videos about the French Revolution. They are usually full of dates, names, and battles. But the title of this video is French Revolution, Birth of the New World.
We shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields, and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never
The
surrender.
subjects we will talk about are the metaphysical reasons behind revolutions and the consequences we are still living with today. Everything begins with the reign of Louis XIV. From the outside, his rule looked successful. France was powerful, centralized, and feared. But when we go deeper, we see something different, a system slowly destroying itself. While rulers in other European countries were forced to make concessions, French kings retained absolute power. And as you know, comrades, when power has no limits, society eventually revolts. That is exactly what happened in France. By the end of 18th century, France had a population of nearly 28 million people, divided into three estates. The first estate, the clergy, controlled around 10% of French land, wealthy, influential, and largely exempt from taxes. The second estate, the nobility, owned about 25% of the land, and ruled the country without listening to the majority. The third estate, the commoners, made up around 97% of the population, peasants, urban workers, and the growing middle class. They carried the tax burden and had almost no political power. France had a general assembly called the Estates General, representing all three states, but representation did not mean equality. At the end of 1780s, the king realized that France faced serious financial crisis. His solution was simple: raise taxes. On May 5, 1789, the Estates General met at Versailles. The clergy and nobility proposed raising taxes only on the third estate. Although commoners were the majority both in France and in the assembly, their voices meant nothing. This was the moment when real change began. When representatives of the third estate discovered that their meeting hall had been closed, they gathered elsewhere and swore the tennis court oath, promising not to disperse until France had a constitution. Louis XVI initially hesitated. He considered compromise, but his wife, Marie Antoinette, pushed him in the opposite direction. Soon, rumors spread across Paris. The king planned to use force. The people responded. In July 1789, Parisians stormed the Bastille, a prison that symbolized absolutism itself. From that moment on, the revolution accelerated. At first, France became constitutional monarchy, then a republic, and eventually an empire. This raises an important question. If revolutionaries fought for freedom and achieved it in 1789 with a constitution, why did they continue the revolution? Why did they abolish the monarchy entirely? The answer is simple. The French Revolution terrified Europe's kings. They realized that if France could overthrow its monarch, any society could. European powers prepared to invade France and restore absolute rule. French revolutionaries understood something crucial. As long as Louis XVI remained king, the revolution was never safe. On September 22, 1792, France declared itself a republic, but new dangers emerged. What if European monarchs invaded and crowned Louis king again? Inside the republic, political factions formed. We will name two of them, the Girondins and the Jacobins. Both were republicans. Both supported the overthrow of the monarchy, but after the republic proclaimed, they had nothing in common. The Girondins feared radicalism. The Jacobins believed that as long as Louis lived, the revolution was in danger. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was executed. Later, Marie Antoinette met the same fate. From this moment, the Jacobins seized power. Under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, the state became a tool of ideological purification. Opposition was crushed, suspicion became policy. Between September 1793 and July 1794, around 300,000 people were arrested. About 16,600 were executed by guillotine. Tens of thousands more died in prison or without trial. This period became known as the Reign of Terror. Eventually, the revolution devoured its own leaders. On 28 July 1784, Robespierre himself was executed. The terror ended. From 1795 to 1798, France was ruled by the Directory, 5 directors elected by parliament. Their rule was weak, corrupt, and unstable. And in moments of chaos, power often shifts to those who control force. In 1799, a general named Napoleon Bonaparte overthrew the Directory. The consulate began. The French Revolution was a metaphysical and philosophical break in history. It destroyed the sacred foundation of authority and replaced it with human reason and will. Influenced by Enlightenment thought, power was no longer justified by God, but by abstract ideas such as liberty and equality. This shift revealed a dangerous truth. If society is created by humans, it can also be unmade by them. Modern revolutions are born from this realization. Well, here we are. France has defeated its king, and now it stands alone against the angry and frightened monarchs of Europe. From this moment on, philosophers and idealists need something new: warriors, soldiers, who can defend the radical idea that people rule their own homeland. This is the new world in which the reign of Napoleon is born. Do you know, comrade, when military operations against revolutionary France truly began? In 1791, Frederick William II of Prussia and Leopold II of the Habsburg Empire, brother of Marie Antoinette, met at Pillnitz Castle. There they issued what became known as the Declaration of Pillnitz, expressing solidarity with Louis XVI, signaling that Europe's monarchs were ready to intervene. Soon after, Leopold II moved troops toward the French border. On April 20, 1792, revolutionary France declared war on the Holy Roman Empire to defend dynastic order. Austria's allies soon followed. In September 1792, coalition forces captured the city of Verdun and advanced toward Paris, but French revolutionary armies counterattacked and won a decisive psychological victory at the Battle of Valmy. As French soldiers advanced, they sang La Marseillaise, a revolutionary war hymn that soon became the anthem of the newborn republic. Valmy was a minor military engagement, but its meaning was immense. A citizen army defeated professional monarchist troops. Revolutionary legitimacy was proven by force. For the first time, France believed that history itself had chosen the revolution, facing invasions on all borders. France introduced the levée en masse in 1793. The nation became an army. War became ideological. Civilian and military life merged. From the French perspective, this was not brutality, it was necessity. Between 1792 and 1795, France defended itself against a vast coalition: the Holy Roman Empire, Prussia, Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, Spain, Portugal, Naples, and even the Pope. The French National Army did not just survive, it hardened, learned, and evolved. And from this furnace of total war, a general rose from the chaos. And this is the paradox of revolution. France did not survive because it was peaceful, moral, or united. It survived because it learned how to turn an idea into force. The revolution had destroyed kings, but it had not yet learned how to govern reality. Liberty needed administration, equality needed discipline, and ideals needed someone who could command men, not just inspire them. This is where history makes its turn. Out of the chaos of total war, a new figure emerged. Not a philosopher, not a noble, but a soldier. Napoleon Bonaparte was not born into destiny. He was forged by the revolution itself. The levée en masse created armies of citizens. The terror removed all the elites. War rewarded talent over birth. For the first time in European history, ability mattered more than blood. Napoleon understood something his contemporaries did not: that modern war was no longer about kings, it was about nations in motion. While politicians argued and governments collapsed, Napoleon delivered victories. He gave the revolution what it desperately needed: order without restoration. To the people, he was proof that the revolution worked. To soldiers, he was destiny in human force. To Europe's monarchs, he was the revolution with a sword. And so, power shifted. Not back to kings, but not fully to the people either. It concentrated in one man. The French Revolution revealed a terrifying truth. Once authority loses its sacred foundation, nothing is stable anymore. Power no longer comes from God, but it also does not remain peacefully with the masses. It flows toward whoever can give meaning to chaos. Napoleon did not betray the revolution. He fulfilled its hidden logic. The revolution destroyed the old world. Napoleon organized the new one. And from that moment on, Europe would never again be ruled by traditions alone, but by ideas, armies, and the men who could unite them. Napoleon was not the end of the revolution. He was its completion. Revolutionaries begin by destroying legitimacy, but destruction alone creates only vacuum. Sooner or later, the vacuum demands form. Napoleon provided that form. The revolution shattered monarchy, nobility, and divine authority. But it also created chaos, unstable governments, exhausted people, endless war. What France needed was not another assembly, but a principle of order, strong enough to replace the sacred. Napoleon understood this instinctively. He did not rule as a king chosen by God. He ruled as a man chosen by history. Under Napoleon, revolutionary ideals did not disappear. They were disciplined. Equality became equality before the law. Liberty became regulated freedom. Popular sovereignty became centralized authority. The Napoleonic Code did what centuries of monarchy never achieved. It transformed revolutionary ideals into permanent legal reality. This was the revolution, no longer emotional, but institutional. Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804. To some, this looked like a betrayal, but metaphysically, it was something else. He did not take power from God, he took it from the revolution itself. By crowning himself, Napoleon declared that legitimacy now came from achievement, victory, and order, not bloodline. Across Europe, French armies carried more than cannons. They carried abolition of feudalism, legal equality, secular administration. To conquered elites, Napoleon was a tyrant. To millions living under old regimes, he was the future arriving violently. The revolution had become exportable, metaphysical climax. Every revolution reaches a moment where it must choose, remain infinite chaos, or crystallize into authority. Napoleon was the crystallization. He proved that once society destroys sacred power, it does not return to tradition. Instead, it creates new myths of nation, law, and the exceptional individual. Modern politics is born here, not in parliaments alone, but in the fusion of idea, army, and leader. Napoleon fell, but the world he shaped did not. From this moment on, Europe would live under a permanent tension between freedom and order, between mass politics and personal rule, between revolution and empire. And that tension still defines our world today. Napoleon did not fall because he lost a single battle. He fell because the idea that carried him forward finally ran out of meaning. Revolutions generate immense energy, but that energy is not infinite. Napoleon was the revolution in motion, and motion, by its nature, cannot last forever. At first, Napoleon expanded not just borders, but legitimacy. Every victory seemed to confirm that history itself marched with him. But slowly, the logic changed. What began as liberation turned into administration. What began as defense turned into domination. What began as meaning turned into maintenance. The revolution no longer asked why it marched, only how far. The continental system is a perfect symbol of this exhaustion. Designed to defeat Britain economically, it instead strangled European economies, alienated allies, turned subjects into reluctant participants. The revolutionary promise could no longer compensate for everyday suffering. When an idea demands sacrifice without renewal, faith erodes. The invasion of Russia in 1812 was not just a strategic mistake, it was a metaphysical overreach. Napoleon tried to impose order on a space that resisted meaning itself. Endless, cold, indifferent. The Grand Army marched as the embodiment of modern will. It returned as proof that history does not obey indefinitely. After Russia, Napoleon still fought, but belief had already collapsed. By the time Europe defeated Napoleon, it was not just resisting conquest, it was resisting exhaustion. Europe wanted rest, stability, an end to permanent mobilization. At the Congress of Vienna, monarchs attempted to freeze history, to restore balance, tradition, and limits. They could defeat Napoleon, but they could not undo what he revealed. Metaphysical conclusion. Napoleon's fall teaches a final lesson of the revolution. Ideas can overthrow the world, but they cannot rule it endlessly. Revolutionary energy must either transform into stable institutions or burn itself out in expansion. Napoleon chose expansion. And so the revolution exhausted itself, not in defeat, but in completion. Modern history begins here, a world where no order is eternal, no revolution final, and no victory permanent. 1815, the pause, not the peace. In 1815, Europe did not heal, it simply caught its breath. At the Congress of Vienna, Europe's monarchs gathered with one shared belief, that history could be put back into its cage. Borders were redrawn, thrones were restored. The language of legitimacy returned to crowns, bloodlines, and tradition. But something crucial was missing: belief. The old order was restored in form, but not in spirit. Kings ruled again, yet they ruled without metaphysical certainty. The divine aura of monarchy had been shattered in 1789, humiliated by Napoleon. What remained was power without faith, authority without inevitability. Even its greatest architect, Clemens von Metternich, understood the truth. The system could survive only by suppressing motion, not inspiring loyalty. Europe entered an age of repression disguised as stability. Censorship, secret police, alliances like the Holy Alliance. The goal was not progress, but containment. Contain the revolution, contain the people, contain history itself. But history does not disappear when silenced. It accumulates pressure. Ideas born during the French Revolution, nationhood, equality, popular sovereignty, were pushed underground, where they grew stronger, not weaker. By pretending that 1789 had never happened, Europe guaranteed that it would happen again. Metaphysical meaning of the pause. 1817 marks the moment when Europe chose order over truth. The truth was simple and unbearable. Once society learns, it can reinvent itself. It can never unlearn it. The Congress of Vienna froze time politically, but accelerated it philosophically. From this moment on, revolutions would no longer ask permission. They would erupt. The pause would last only a generation. In 1830, in 1848, across France, Germany, Italy, and beyond, history restarted with greater force. Not because Napoleon returned, but because the question he embodied remained unanswered. Who has the right to rule in a world where God has been dethroned? Closing reflection. 1815 did not restore the old world. It created a fragile illusion of permanence, and illusions, once exposed, collapsed violently. The 18th century was not an age of peace, it was an age of waiting. Waiting for the next explosion, waiting for the next ideology, waiting for history to resume its march, and when it did, it would no longer be satisfied with kings alone. There is one interesting fact that Napoleon's conquest caused. After the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire, the map of Central Europe was shattered. Southern German principalities withdrew from the old imperial structure and were absorbed into a French-dominated protectorate. It was in this moment of humiliation and occupation that the philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte delivered his famous addresses to the German nation between 1807 and 1808. These speeches were not abstract philosophy, they were a call to spiritual resistance. Fichte attempted to define what the German nation truly was, not a state, not a dynasty, but a moral and cultural community bound by language, education, and inner freedom. His words helped transform defeat into identity and guided the intellectual uprising against Napoleon's domination. Dear comrades, I will say it loudly, Fichte became the first true German nationalist, whose main ideal was defending and uniting Germany, its former glory, its people in one country. Revolutions continued. The defeat of Napoleon on the battlefield did not kill the idea of freedom. In 1830, after 15 years of Congress of Vienna, another revolution started. French people overthrew Charles X Bourbon. They crowned Louis Philippe I with interesting title, Citizen King. It meant that Louis Philippe became a king because French people decided to crown him. But if he ruled without listening to people, he would lose his power. In 1830, revolutions spread around Europe, but these revolutions had national and nationalistic roots. Inspired by Paris, the Belgian Revolution broke away from Dutch rule. Belgium became independent from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. Constitutional, nationally defined, this was a crucial shift. Nationhood proved stronger than dynastic legitimacy. The November uprising of Poland against Russian rule. Unfortunately, it failed. Its defeat showed that brutal truth, ideas alone, were not enough. Without power, legitimacy dies. Romantic nationalism was born here, heroic, tragic, and defeated. Across the Italian states and German Confederation, students revolted, intellectuals demanded constitutions. National unity was imagined, but not achieved. Repression returned, but the idea could not be erased. The 1830s proved that 1815 had not restored the old world. Revolution was no longer about destroying monarchy, but about forcing legitimacy to justify itself. Power survived, but only by negotiating with nations, constitutions, public opinion. Why the 1830s matter? These revolutions did not finish the transformation. They prepared it. They taught Europe. Revolution could be selective. Nationalism could succeed. Compromise could delay, but not end history. The result was a fragile continent, balanced between fear and expectation, and that balance would collapse again in 1848. Why 1848 exploded everywhere? By mid-century, Europe was under strain. Industrialization created a new working class. Liberalism demanded constitutions. Nationalism demanded unity. Monarchies offered oppression instead of reform. A poor harvest and economic crisis lit the fuse. France, the Republic returns. In February 1848, Paris rose again. The July monarchy collapsed, and France proclaimed the Second French Republic. The president of France was nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, Louis Napoleon. For the first time, universal male suffrage was introduced. Social rights entered politics. But unity did not last. Class conflict erupted between workers and bourgeois republicans, foreshadowing modern ideological struggle. The German states, nation imagined. In the German Confederation, crowds forced concessions. The Frankfurt Parliament attempted to unify Germany through law and reason. It failed. Without an army or executive power, ideals collapsed under force. The Habsburg Empire, many nations, one explosion. Vienna, Prague, and Budapest erupted. Hungarians, Czechs, Italians, and others demanded autonomy. The empire survived, but only through military repression and Russian intervention. Multinational empires learned that nationalism was an existential threat. Italy, unity postponed. Italian revolts changed Austrian control. National unity was dreamed, not achieved. But 1848 created the political myth that later leaders would use. Metaphysical meaning of 1848. 1848 exposed the brutal truth. Ideas alone do not rule history. Organization and force do. Liberalism lacked discipline. Socialism lacked power. Nationalism lacked unity. But none disappeared. They went underground, waiting. Why 1848 still matters? 1848 failed politically, but succeeded historically. It proved the masses had entered politics permanently. Legitimacy now required consent. Ideology would replace tradition as history's engine. From this point, Europe would not fear revolution, it would expect it. In our next video, we move to Germany and Italy. Lands that did not simply unify, but redefined power itself. The year 1870 changed everything. For the first time, nations were not born from dynasties, but forged through war, discipline, and ideology. Unity was no longer a dream of philosophers, it became a project of generals and statesmen. Figures like Otto von Bismarck and Giuseppe Garibaldi showed Europe a new path, nationhood through force. From this moment on, nationalism became aggressive, industrial, and irreversible. The unification of Germany and Italy did not close the age of revolution, they militarized it. And from that militarization would rise new ideologies, new alliances, and ultimately, the world wars. History did not calm down after 1870, it accelerated. See you soon, comrades.